Hello and welcome to Oakville Matters. You know, I hear from a lot of people, old and young, that we must be doing something to prepare for the aging of society, and we are. And today we're going to talk about that with our guest, Heather Thompson, who is the manager of age-friendly initiatives at Community Development Halton, and Daryl Kaytor, who's the housing initiatives advisor for the region of Halton, and my good friend Susan Hyatt, who is the CEO and the co-founder of an interesting operation called Silver Sherpa. And Susan, I realized when I was getting ready for the show that Silver Sherpa is one of those things you have to slow down to say. Have you noticed that?
Absolutely. It's a great name. You slow down to say it, but it's also people who know about Sherpas. It's a way to define the market right away, because people who are over the age of 50 probably know what Sherpas are, and people under the age of 50 probably don't know what Sherpas are.
But boy, are they going to find out.
Are they going to find out?
My kids are under 50, and I'm sure they're not thinking about the need to carry mom and dad around, but that day is coming.
The day is coming.
So, Daryl, what do you do as an initiatives advisor?
Well, my primary responsibility is I manage our homelessness and homelessness prevention programs. So I'm extremely passionate about those programs, about serving the most vulnerable, but also through the whole continuum of care. So I think I try very hard to move our programs further and further upstream, especially for older adults, to prevent them becoming at risk or becoming homeless before it happens.
Sure, because people think of, for homelessness, I don't think they think of the elderly, but in fact we do have seniors who face homelessness. Absolutely. And Susan has an interesting idea or two about that. And Heather, Community Development Halton is a well-established organization. I've often joked that it's the Halton version of a social planning council.
Correct.
Many years ago in the 70s, when I lived in Sudbury and I was a young, actually I was an English professor there, they had what they called a social planning council, and you know, everybody was. There's been kind of a rebranding that goes on around that. Tell me a little bit about what the Community Development Halton folks are doing in respect to aging.
So Community Development Halton has two programs, as you know, social planning and research, as well as the Volunteer Center, which is right across the region. And so part of the research that we do that's really important to our aging work is looking at the demographics of older adults in Halton and looking at different issues. For example, how many seniors go out on a daily outing every day? Or what are their income levels like in terms of all the municipalities? So we look at those kinds of facts, and we also did a dispatch on senior isolation and loneliness, as well as a document that is well used at universities and throughout the region and elsewhere. That kind of helps identify where there's some gaps and needs that perhaps we should put our energies into in making the quality of life better for people.
So you're speaking from a research and identifying gaps kind of perspective, mm-hmm. or some might think a bit of a gadfly, you know, cracking the whip, get going on this stuff. Right?
Yes, and part of my work with, I've been seconded to the work with the age-friendly piece with the Burlington, so Age-Friendly Burlington Council, as well as the Halton Age-Friendly Network. We received from Ontario Trillium funding to be able to produce that kind of work and to grow the work right across Halton region, where we have representation from all the municipalities. And it is the framework from the World Health Organization that looks at 8 domains of what makes an age-friendly city. And although the focus is definitely on older adults, we feel that whatever we do for older adults will be good for all people of all ages.
Sure.
So we look at things like housing and transportation, communication, healthcare, and what we can do to advocate and improve quality of life.
So you mentioned the work of Halton, you mentioned the work of Burlington. Of course, Halton is an unusual structure. I paused to explain it because the average person in Oakville, I don't think, gets it. There are 4 local municipalities that together comprise the regional municipality, and the programs and the capital and the services and the infrastructure that's too big for any one gets done on a shared cooperative basis at this regional municipal level. We're a 2-tier municipality. So you've got Burlington, you've got Halton Hills, you've got Milton, and you've got Oakville, and I do that alphabetically so as not to offend anybody. In Oakville, we also have age-friendly work underway, and that was my roundabout way to work in credit for Oakville on this front. I wanted to go back to Susan because you had two things that I thought were pretty interesting things to kick off a conversation. One was the idea of elder orphans, and the other was this question you had about sharing a house, and your worry that it wasn't legal in Oakville. And so hit me with either one. And
Okay, well, we can have a good discussion about that, Mayor, because on this panel, at Silver Sherpa, we're a private company, so we're retained by families to help them sort out complex situations as their elders go into that later stage of life. So if you think about the work we're doing at Silver Sherpa, it's complex situations and it gets complicated, and it's when seniors are making transitions.
So does that mean that when my wife and I call on our kids, they're going to call on you?
That's correct. So there are some families who their children, their adult children, carry my business card in their wallet because that's their insurance policy if mom or dad go down. Now, that's not really a good plan. What we'd like to see happen is that families have a good talk about this, just like you talk about your wills or your powers of attorney. We'd like you to talk about this too before you get into crisis.
So we should cut the middle people out, the kids out, and just go direct to Silver Sherpa.
Some seniors do. So
And plan ahead.
you plan ahead. So this concept of elder orphans is a really interesting one. I think the term was coined back in the healthcare system in the U.S. back in 2003 or 2004 in some studies that were being done just around healthcare. And people, seniors, frail seniors, were being discharged from hospital, but they really didn't have anywhere to go because they needed someone to look after them, and that's what the healthcare people were worried about. So they coined that term. But then I think political correctness took over, and everybody thought, oh, we can't call them elder orphans. That, you know, people might think that's negative. So it sort of disappeared out of the literature, and then the last couple of years you've seen the term elder orphan pop up in the U.S. literature
you're bravely
again.
bringing it back.
I don't know if it's brave or not, but it's a good way to think about this because let's say that you and your wife, your children all move out of the country, which a lot of families do. The kids, one's in Zurich, one's in Sydney, Australia, and one's in California. Something happens to you and your wife, and let's say dad gets dementia, but mom's hiding it. So you're sort of coping together. And then all of a sudden dad has a heart attack, or mom has a heart attack and dies. Dad's on his own. He's got dementia that the kids don't know about, and the kids aren't here. So what do you do? So there's a concept of you're a bit of an orphan in that if you want to stay in your own community, you're going to need a lot of supports around you. So we worry about things like that with families because what do you do? I mean, what is the plan?
Will home sharing help that? Or is home sharing for a different category of elder?
That's completely different.
Okay.
So the other elder orphan, if you think about it, there's three big buckets, and Heather and I have worked together on the Older Adult Advisory Committee in Halton, and we've had discussions about this before, that as you age, and I plan to live to 125, so I've notified my children, and they ran out of the room screaming. So
they've relaxed though. They figure you're going to outlive them or something.
Absolutely, absolutely. But if you think about it, what are the three big buckets you need to worry about? You need to worry about health care because things wear out, right? We talked about this before.
Oh, please, I hope not.
They do, trust me. I've started replacing parts already. And then the second thing is that you need money. right? Because the healthcare system's great on the acute care side, not so good when you get back to home. So you need money to bring in people to look after yourself, and you need legal things like wills and powers of attorney. So that's where, as elder orphans, this stuff starts to break down, because what if you outlive your powers of attorney and you have no children? Who do you appoint?
There's a public official. What's
A
the
public guardian and trustee.
Public guardian
They're
trustee.
a little overworked today, and we're only at the tip of the iceberg. So it's the simple things. Who do you appoint as power of attorney?
So we need to hope that the entire baby boom generation thinks like you and will manage the trick of living longer, so the burden will be less sudden.
Absolutely. And you know what? We're the baby boomer generation. We rocked it before. Now we're going to have to rock it in aging.
I want to ask Daryl about co-housing, but I have to put in, I call my dad is 96. I call my dad every Friday. He's from the World War II generation.
Yes.
The guys of the World War II generation, by and large, you shouldn't talk, right? Especially not personal.
No.
Taciturn. Met a few words and all that. I go, Dad, how are you? He goes, I'm planning to live to be 100. This is the same words every Friday. And I always say, for Pete's sake, Dad, Grandpa lived to be 100. Would you aim higher? I'd like to see some progress.
Well, there you go.
And then he says, are we done yet? I got a date.
I got a date. Good for him. Now
Perfect.
that's smart aging.
That's how you avoid becoming an orphan. That's great.
That's right. You just need a girlfriend.
That's one way. That's one way. Absolutely.
So now co-housing, what's this co-housing mean? And are you comfortable to answer that?
Sure. I mean, there's a variety of different forms, I think, that we can talk about. And I mean, I'll leave one specific that Heather can talk about, and that's home share. That's one form of co-sharing, of home sharing. But I think what's most important for us at the region is in our older adult plan. It really asks us to consider in all of our programs and services the needs of older adults. So I had a wonderful meeting one day with Heather where she had a whole book of different kind of co-housing initiatives that could happen, different strategies, different approaches, and it was really just incumbent on us to listen to the experts in the community, the older adults who knew best, and we were really able to come up with a very quick co-housing opportunity called Halton Home Share, simply by listening to the needs of the community, something they'd already developed. So I'll let Heather tell you a little bit about home share, but that's something I think we're incredibly passionate about because it's a good example of partnering with the community, using the regional infrastructure, regional funding with the expertise that exists within the community agencies.
And I might mention as a footnote that the region has some provincially derived power in housing. I think you're technically the housing
Service manager.
That's right, housing service manager, and that is no pale title. That is no weak role. So,
No, certainly. It's one we take very seriously because it gives us the entire continuum of supports. And I think when we look at older adults, there's such a range of needs required, all the way from a light touch, someone to just help them go over their options, all the way to the acute care, which you were talking about, and everything in between. And that's a huge responsibility, so you really have to divide it up into different kinds of segments.
okay, so shared housing, Heather, but before, just 1 second before, co-housing is just a broad category that includes things like shared housing. Is that the secret to that?
Yeah. But
Shared.
I think just to interrupt, I think what's really interesting about Halton, we deal across Ontario right now and are looking across Canada for expansion. And I think Halton is truly one of the leaders in this area. I say that because I served on the committee for 2 years and watched all of the work that was being done. And I don't say that just because it's your show, Mayor Burton. And
Well, I'm only the mayor
part
of
of Halton.
Oakville.
You're only the mayor of Oakville, so
I'm
we
not
want you to. No, but truly, Halton is a leader in that. Number one, you said it, Daryl. Halton listens to the seniors in the community. So there's a very active, age-friendly group in Burlington. There's the working group, the seniors working group here in Oakville. There's a very active group in Georgetown, centered out of Hillsview and Terry and Wilf and those folks up there. I've been up and working with them. So everybody listens, and the region listens, and then you take the strategies and actually turn them back to the seniors to help implement. It's unusual
Well, if
to
you
see
think about
that.
who lives in Halton, in Burlington, Halton Hills, Milton, and Oakville, you have high-achieving people. You have people with high expectations of themselves, and believe me, they have higher expectations of local government services. So there really is a spirit I've seen at the region and at the town of lead, follow, or get out of the way. But progress is our most important product here. So Heather, we've danced around the shared housing thing, and I know there's a regulatory issue buried in here somewhere. Why don't you illuminate the shared housing issue?
So we started the Halton Home Share program, and that was born out of the Halton Age-Friendly Housing Committee, because we wanted to have a housing committee to look at what we could do that could make a difference for people who live in Halton, people looking to live somewhere that's affordable, but also for older adults to be able to remain in their home. Because we heard from a lot of older adults saying, as we talked about, I don't really want to move. My home is very big. I have 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms, and but I really don't want to go anywhere because I may have to move out of my community and leave all my friends or my family. So we heard about home share programs in the US and also in Europe. It's quite popular, but didn't know much about what was happening in Canada. And at that time, about 3 or 4 years ago, we found out there was 4 home shares running in Canada, but none formally in Ontario at that time. And so we did our homework and we developed a toolkit that if people were thinking of home share, it might be something they may want to consider. So here's an older adult who may have someone come and live with them for reduced accommodation expenses for shared services. So that person may do 5 to 10 hours worth of work a week, and it could be just chores around the house. It could be cutting your lawn, shoveling snow, getting groceries, or having a meal together. And we found in Burlington, Vermont, I actually went down there to look at their home share program. They've been running for 35 years, very successful, and we learned a lot of best practices from there. So from there, and we couldn't do this alone, we had to have a lot of support from volunteers. And so from there, we wanted to develop this home share program, but we knew we needed an overriding body to be able to make it safe for vulnerable seniors. And so we needed to have police checks and screenings and home environment assessment and monitoring of home share arrangements to know that it would be a safe place for seniors to be and have someone live with them.
And do you have a mechanism to correct when things go wrong? Because I know we had a very dear friend who took in somebody about 10 years ago, and it really went bad. The person was very badly motivated around trying to exploit the senior, and it was hell to unwind that.
And that certainly is a concern, and we do say right off the top on every time we talk about it, it's good for many but not for all, and people have to feel comfortable. But with the monitoring situation that we have now,
you can get in and fix it if it goes bad.
Yes, and
that's very good.
And the region came to us and said, we're interested in doing this. So we were so excited because we thought, well, this is a wonderful partnership. And so we started the ball rolling, and we can help encourage and educate other adults and adult children as well about the program so they're aware of it. And we also made recommendations. So for example, on the monitoring piece of it, when the staff go in and monitor the home share situations regularly, they don't just meet with the home seeker or the home sharer and home provider together. They may meet separately so that there's no power imbalance there. So the home provider can honestly say how things are going, what is happening. And so there is that overriding piece that you're not just going in it alone, you have that support network to be able to resolve differences and issues. So we do have actually 1 home share running right now, and we have 2 or 3 in the works that are happening, 1 in Oakville and 1 in Milton, another 1 in Milton as well. So we're very excited that this is just another alternative for people. It may not be the best one for many, but it certainly is an alternative if people want to stay in their own home.
Does this link up with the community care folks, the provincial agency? I'm calling it that because I can't remember the initials. the CCAC.
Oh, the
or
home and community care.
Yeah.
Yes, so the home seeker that goes into the home would not be doing any personal care. They just solely do household responsibilities and chores. So if an older adult needs that type of...
But you could hook them up?
Yes, absolutely. They could be hooked up to all kinds of resources that they may need. And so if they need home and community care, they need other kinds of services, that's something that the region could definitely help with and get them sorted out in those kinds of services.
I learned through a casual encounter, I learned that the home care folks periodically go in and test to see whether the person actually needs as much care as they're sending in, and they pull it back if they think they could look after themselves more. Right.
I think what's really interesting about what Heather is saying, though, about home sharing is think of the possibilities with multi-generations. Because if we think about, like here in Oakville, we have Sheridan College, right? There are a lot of students at Sheridan, and they're scrambling to pay their fees, and they need a place to live. We have numerous seniors in Oakville who are in need of a friend. They'd like someone in the home. They don't want to live on their own. They're afraid to give up their home, though, and they want to stay in their community, and we want them to stay in their community because as you age, you want to be near your banker. You want to be near your doctor and your dentist and your hairdresser. You don't want to go live with your kids.
We've all heard
necessarily.
That children are delayed in leaving home to a certain extent, and I know my third child, my last child, left home last year in his middle 20s. And it was quite a jolt because all of a sudden I had to shovel the snow again. But it's a good news story. I learned that I still can, so no biggie. And it's probably good for me, I grant. We're dancing around this one issue I want to make sure we clear up, which is whether there's a regulatory barrier to home sharing, and who wants to be the one to confront me with the question?
Well, the home share situation is a little different. Usually it's just, could be a couple asking for someone to live with them, or it could be, a young married couple who want to live with an older senior and help and save money. So in that situation...
Aren't you or somebody worried about whether it's falls under the rooming house bylaw,
No,
or the
I'm
lodging
not
house?
Yeah, not for the home share so
Okay.
much, and I think it's more the co-housing where it could be a little different. It's a little different than the home share situation.
So let's go back to
Yeah, so
co-housing.
the-
Let's
It's a little
co-housing. So
Yeah.
Heather, it's sort of a continuum,
It
I
is,
think. So
yeah.
the home sharing could be one part of it, and the strategies around homelessness for low-income seniors. But let's push it to the other end of the continuum, where you've got 4 women who have assets. They're living in Oakville. They're all over the age of 80, and they've decided they want to be the Golden Girls. And they want to have fun and live together. Let's say there's 6 of them. And is there a bylaw that prevents 6 Golden Girls or 4 Golden Girls from getting together in Southeast Oakville, setting up a corporation, and owning a home collectively? Is there anything to prevent that? Someone had said to us that there was a rooming bylaw issue in Oakville. So that's the regulatory question.
Okay, so my answer is no.
Good.
That's good
Okay,
news.
Have at it.
girls,
Have
here
at
we
it.
come.
And I don't want this to get focused on one particular corner of Oakville. It's not a problem anywhere. So
Anywhere in Oakville, you think that?
I don't think it's a
somebody
problem
could-
anywhere in the province, actually. But you're free to go out and cast your new version of the Golden Girls, and I want to know if you're going to be B. Arthur.
I'm going to keep you in suspense for the next time I come on the show. There's another question I've got for you. If we push the envelope on housing, because Daryl and I were talking about this, what about granny pods in the backyard? We lived in Australia for 3 years, and in Sydney, this is a really popular thing in Brisbane and Melbourne to do, is when granny gets or grandpa gets to the stage that they need supervision, a little extra help, and they want to be closer to the kids, they drop a granny pod, prefab granny pod into the backyard. and it stays there for however long. Now, in my case, it would be 25 years after I'm 100, and it stays there, and then when I move on to greater things in the sky, then the granny pod gets removed. So is there any reason we can't do that in Oakville?
Well, the reason that you could do it is that the housing service manager is at the regional level, and the local municipalities are required to obey upward.
Daryl will look after it.
And the reason that you couldn't quite assume it yet is that in the local municipalities of Halton, all 4 of them, we have zoning that sets up that you can't build these. You can have a secondary suite in your house, but you can't build a pod in the backyard unless you get a variance from the zoning. And we all have a committee of adjustment that exists to allow minor variances. So in theory, there's an avenue to do it, but the default position is you got to justify it.
And I think in Oakville, particularly, I think there's a huge opportunity for the secondary suites as well, because that is permitted. And the region has programs where we can actually fund households up to $50,000 to provide a secondary suite to make it up to code, and then you can rent it out potentially to your elder parents to keep them at home, and you have the money now to do so. Then you can bring in the community care, you can bring in the personal support workers to keep them in the community.
Well, you know, it sounds great, but here's the reality, because I deal on the face-to-face with the families every day.
But you'll take the 50 grand, right?
Not if it's in the basement, because
Sure.
seniors can't do stairs.
Yep.
So are you prepared to put in an elevator? That's the problem. In a lot of cases, it sounds nice, it looks nice on a strategy paper, but the reality is families don't want dad in the basement because dad can't get up and down the stairs easily. That's why the granny pods are so successful in Australia, because you're on the straight. And they don't have basements there. So basements are a problem.
No, absolutely. Point taken. And I think the other emphasis that we do have is we have another opportunity called Halton Renovates, and that's specifically for accessibility concerns. So if we find that mom or dad really could stay if they had an elevator down the steps or guardrails or all that kind of stuff, we do have opportunities to fund those sorts of things too. So there might be opportunities to stack those different avenues. But your point is absolutely taken. It would be preferential to have it on the ground floor, or the more accessible, the better. Absolutely.
That's a perfect final word, and it sets up, I think, everybody who's concerned about this to be bold, ask for what you need, and Halton, all of its municipalities, we are looking to make sure that our livability increases instead of decreases. And with that, I'll see you next time on the next Oakville Matters.